Alaska, winter of 1888, was a white blanket of solitude and challenges. For Lilian, every sunbeam that dared pierce the curtain of grey clouds was a reminder of the broken promise, of the future that had shattered with Liam's death. Her small cabin, built with the sweat and hope of both of them, now felt like an icy tomb. The wind howled through the cracks, a constant lament that mirrored the pain in her chest. Liam, her husband, had been swallowed by the land's greed, a silent avalanche of snow and rocks that took his life and most of their savings. All that remained was Leah, a tiny miracle just months old, snuggled beside her, the only warmth that kept her sane. Despite her grief, reality was a heavier burden. The firewood supply was dangerously low, and the little food left wouldn't last much longer. Lilian knew she had to move, even if her bones ached and her soul yearned for rest. The nearest village, a cluster of wooden shacks and hardened faces, was days of walking away, an almost impossible journey with Leah. Her fingers, chapped and purplish from the constant cold, worked to mend the bear hide she used as a blanket, a stubborn will to survive that she barely recognized in herself. With each movement, the weight of responsibility for Leah became more palpable. She couldn't fail. She couldn't let Alaska take her daughter too. Despair at times threatened to engulf her, but Leah's soft cries were always the anchor that pulled her back to the surface, reminding her why she took each breath, why she held on to every fiber of her strength. Night fell, and with it, the cold intensified, biting exposed skin even inside the makeshift tent she had pitched outside the cabin for when the internal ice of the structure seemed to suffocate her. Lilian held Leah close, feeling the small body warm against hers. The distant howls of wolves were a familiar soundtrack, but tonight they seemed closer, more threatening. Dawn would bring a new day, but what kind of day remained a terrifying mystery. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of frigid grey and pale violet. But the beauty was lost on Lilian. A low growl vibrated through the frozen ground, jolting her awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Outside the thin canvas of her tent, shadows moved. More growls, deeper this time, mixed with the unmistakable scent of wild animal. Wolves. A whole pack. Leah whimpered softly beside her, instinctively sensing the danger. Lilian pulled her closer, a silent prayer escaping her lips. She could hear their heavy breathing, the faint click of claws on hardened snow. One bold shadow pressed against the canvas, its outline clear, eyes probably fixed on the vulnerable forms within. Just as the first tear escaped Lilian's eye, convinced this was the end, a sharp crack split the air. It wasn't the sound of a branch breaking or the creak of ice. It was a rifle shot, precise and powerful. The immediate effect was startling, a yelp followed by a scramble of paws and agitated snarls. The shadows outside scattered, fading into the sparse trees. Lilian held her breath, not daring to move. Had they gone? Was it over? Then a figure emerged from the dawn mist, a silhouette against the rising sun. Tall, lean and cloaked in furs, he carried a rifle with a practiced ease that bespoke of years in the wilderness. His gaze, even from a distance, seemed to pierce through the gloom. It was Kael. He didn't speak, just nodded curtly, a silent acknowledgement of the danger he had just averted. Lilian could only stare, a wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled her knees. Leah, thankfully, had fallen back asleep, oblivious to the terrifying dawn she had just narrowly survived. Kael approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened snow. He wasn't overtly friendly, but his presence radiated a quiet competence that Lilian, despite her ingrained wariness of strangers, found oddly reassuring. He assessed the flimsy tent, then glanced at the cabin. "Not much protection," he stated, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle for a man of the wild. Wolves will be back, smart ones. They remember. Lilian hugged Leah tighter. I know, she stammered, her voice raspy from disuse and fear. My husband, he built the cabin. But the snow took him. I'm all alone. Kael's eyes, dark and piercing, softened almost imperceptibly. He surveyed the area again, his gaze lingering on the fresh tracks in the snow. You can't stay here, he decided. Too exposed. I have a trapper's lean-to a few miles north, safer, more secluded. The offer, though abrupt, was a lifeline. Lilian hesitated. Trusting a stranger in the Alaskan wilderness was a risk, but staying put felt like a death sentence. Her gaze fell on Leah, her tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically. For her daughter, she would face any unknown. Thank you, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Kael simply nodded again. He helped her dismantle the tent, his movements efficient and strong. He packed her meager belongings, including a worn wooden doll Leah clutched, onto a small sled he produced from seemingly nowhere. The journey was arduous. Lilian, weakened by grief and privation, struggled through the deep snow, carrying Leah wrapped tightly against her chest. Kael led the way, his pace steady, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the wind and Leah's occasional soft gurgles. As they trudged deeper into the forest, Lilian began to notice the subtle signs Kael read in the landscape. A broken twig, a disturbed patch of snow, hints of a knowledge deeply ingrained in the harsh rhythms of this land. Kael's lean-to was more substantial than Lilian had imagined. Built against a rock face, it was well insulated with thick layers of moss and branches, offering a surprisingly snug shelter from the biting winds. A small, carefully constructed fire pit inside glowed with warmth, chasing away the pervasive chill that had settled deep in Lilian's bones. Kael silently offered her some dried fish and berries, food she hadn't tasted in weeks. Leah, sensing the warmth and perhaps the underlying safety, began to stir, her small eyes blinking in the dim light. Lilian nursed her, the simple act of providing comfort feeling like a profound victory in this unforgiving world. Over the next few days, a fragile routine began to form. Kael would leave at dawn, returning with game or firewood. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He showed Lilian how to set snares for small game, how to identify edible plants even beneath the snow, and how to build a stronger, more protective fire. He never pried into her past, but his quiet observations seemed to understand more than any words could convey. Lilian, in turn, began to observe him. His movements were fluid, silent, like a shadow in the forest. His knowledge of the land was encyclopedic, and he moved with a deep respect for its power. Yet there was an unspoken sadness in his eyes, a lingering shadow that Lilian couldn't quite decipher. She wondered about his own story. What had brought him to this solitary existence? The peace was tenuous, a fragile bubble in the vast, dangerous wilderness. She knew it wouldn't last forever, but for now, it was a sanctuary, a chance to breathe, to heal, and to plan. The Alaskan winter, however, had many more trials in store. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this. Weeks turned into a month, and the bond between Lilian, Leah, and Kael deepened, forged in the crucible of shared survival. Leah, now a bit older, would gurgle happily at Kael, an innocent warmth that sometimes brought a flicker of something akin to a smile to his stoic face. Lilian found herself relying on him, not just for protection, but for the quiet companionship he offered. One biting afternoon, as Kael returned from a long hunt, his expression was grim. "Trouble," he stated, his voice low. "Prospectors, many of them, coming further north than usual." The news sent a shiver down Lilian's spine. She knew about prospectors. They were often desperate, ruthless, driven by the fever of gold. Liam had been one of them, albeit a gentle one. These new arrivals, Kael explained, were different. They were tearing up the land, polluting the streams, and showing no respect for the delicate balance of the wilderness. He had heard whispers of a new vein, richer than any found before, drawing them like moths to a flame. "They'll find this valley eventually," Kael warned, his gaze sweeping over their secluded haven, "and they won't care who's here." Lilian's heart sank. Just when she thought they had found a semblance of safety, a new threat emerged. The tranquility of their existence was shattered. Kael began to adjust their routine, moving their traps further afield, always on the lookout. He taught Lilian more about tracking and evasion, his lessons now imbued with a new urgency. The whispers of gold were growing louder, carrying with them the ominous promise of conflict and displacement. The encroaching presence of the prospectors forced Kael and Lilian to move their lean-to to an even more remote location, deeper into the rugged mountains. The journey was taxing, particularly with Leah, but Kael's intimate knowledge of hidden trails and natural shelters proved invaluable. As they settled into their new, more secluded refuge, a storm rolled in, trapping them for days. The forced confinement combined with the shared anxiety of the encroaching threat chipped away at Kael's usual reserve. One evening, as the wind howled like a banshee outside, Lilian, huddled by the small fire, finally asked, "Why are you out here alone, Kael? You speak of them with such anger." Kael stared into the flickering flames for a long moment, his profile etched in shadow. "My family," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "My people. We lived in a valley like this, peaceful, until the first gold seekers came." He recounted a tale of displacement, of broken treaties and stolen land. His village, once thriving, had been ravaged by disease and violence brought by the outsiders. His parents, his siblings, all gone. He was one of the few who escaped, carrying the scars of that betrayal, a deep-seated mistrust of those who saw the land only as a resource to exploit. "They promised much," he said, his voice laced with bitter irony, "and took everything." Lilian listened, her heart aching for him. The harshness of the land, she realized, was only part of the story. The true wilderness was often found in the hearts of desperate men. Kael's past, laid bare in the flickering firelight, explained his solitary nature, his profound connection to the land, and his quiet determination to protect it, and now, by extension, them. The shared vulnerability created an even deeper, unspoken bond between them. The harsh reality of the prospectors' arrival became undeniable when Kael, returning from a scouting trip, found their usual fishing spot on the river teeming with unfamiliar faces. A small group of men, their clothes stained with dirt and greed, were panning for gold, their crude tools churning the icy water. Kael watched from the tree line, his expression a mask of grim resolve. "They're close," he told Lilian that evening, his voice tight. "Too close." "Daddy." The next day, desperate for fresh food for Leah, Lilian convinced Kael they needed to try their luck at the river, but further upstream, away from the prospectors. As they approached, a loud, drunken laugh echoed through the trees. A small group of prospectors had ventured upstream, their voices crude and boisterous. One man, burly and with a cruel glint in his eye, spotted them. "Well, well, what have we here? A woman and a child, out in the wild. Lost, little lady?" he sneered, his companions snickering. Fear coiled in Lilian's stomach. Kael stepped forward, his body shielding Lilian and Leah. "Leave them be," he said, his voice calm but firm. The burly man laughed, taking a step closer. "Or what, wilderness man? You gonna shoot us all with that fancy stick?" Kael's hand went to his rifle, but before he could react, the man lunged. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Kael, though an expert hunter, was outnumbered. He fought with a fierce, primal intensity, defending Lilian and Leah with every fibre of his being. Lilian, terrified but desperate, searched for anything to help, grabbing a heavy branch. The conflict escalated, a stark reminder of the lawlessness of the land. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this. The scuffle at the river was short but brutal. Kael, despite his skill, took a blow to the head and a deep cut to his arm. The prospectors, surprised by his ferocity, eventually retreated, grumbling threats, but not before realizing they had stumbled upon more than just easy prey. Lilian rushed to Kael's side, her hands trembling as she pressed a makeshift bandage to his bleeding arm. Leah, startled by the commotion, was crying inconsolably. "Are you all right?" Lilian whispered, her voice choked with fear and relief. Kael nodded, his face pale, but his eyes still sharp. "They'll be back," he rasped. "They always do." Back at their lean-to, Lilian tended to Kael's wounds with what little medical supplies she had left from her husband's kit. She cleaned the cut on his arm, her touch gentle but firm, then bandaged his head wound. As she worked, she felt a profound shift in their relationship. The protector was now vulnerable, and she, despite her inexperience, was caring for him. The shared ordeal cemented their bond further, stripping away the last vestiges of Kael's stoicism and Lilian's initial distrust. "We can't keep running," Lilian said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "We need a plan." Kael, propped against the rock face, looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What kind of plan?" he asked. "We need help," Lilian stated, her gaze unwavering. "There must be others, perhaps other native families, or honest prospectors, who want to keep this land safe from men like them." Kael was silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "There are others," he admitted. "But they are wary, like me." The shared danger, however, was forging an unlikely alliance. The raw, untamed nature of Alaska had brought them together, and now it demanded they stand together. With Kael's wounds slowly mending, a new resolute focus solidified between them, active defense. The days of simply surviving, of merely reacting to the wilderness and its threats, were over. Kael, though still a man deeply ingrained with caution and a lifetime of self-reliance, recognized the undeniable wisdom in Lilian's suggestion. The prospectors, a blight on the pristine landscape, were growing bolder with each passing day, their avarice a constant oppressive shadow that stretched over their hidden valley. He began to make discreet, arduous trips, venturing to the hidden enclaves of his people, to scattered, isolated trapper camps tucked away in forgotten valleys, and even to the very fringes of the small, struggling trading post further south. Each journey was a calculated risk, a delicate dance of persuasion and observation. He returned each time with fragments of information, grim news of encroaching claims and dwindling resources, but sometimes, crucially, with a cautious nod of agreement. There were others who felt the same way, whose hearts burned with a quiet resentment for the destructive greed of the newcomers. They were few, these wary souls, and they were scarred by their own encounters with the gold rush fever. But the shared threat, the looming violation of their land, was slowly but surely uniting them. Lilian, in the meantime, was anything but idle. Her hands, once soft from a gentler life, were now calloused and capable. She practiced relentlessly with Kael's spare hunting knife, her movements becoming less clumsy, more deliberate, as she absorbed the basic self-defense techniques he reluctantly but thoroughly taught her. She learned to set simple alarms around their camp, a delicate web of twigs and stones that would betray the slightest intrusion. Her senses sharpened, able to identify the subtle signs of intruders, a displaced rock, a faint boot print in the snow, the unnatural silence of the forest. Leah, a beacon of innocence in their tense existence, would often cling to Lilian, sensing the heightened emotions, But Lilian, fueled by a fierce, unyielding maternal instinct, refused to let fear paralyze her. Every action, every moment of learning was for Leah. The days grew shorter, the sun a pale, distant memory, and the cold deepened its relentless grip, mirroring the tension that hung thick in the air. The prospectors, increasingly frustrated by their elusive prey and the valley's refusal to yield its secrets easily, were becoming more aggressive, venturing closer to their hidden refuge. Kael reported seeing smoke from their new, larger encampment, a stark, visual reminder of their growing numbers, their increasing audacity. The air was thick with anticipation, the quiet calm before a storm that promised to break violently. Both Lilian and Kael knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that a larger confrontation was inevitable. The final chapter of their desperate struggle for survival in this unforgiving land was about to unfold. The final, brutal confrontation arrived with a biting snowstorm, its swirling white chaos a fitting, almost poetic backdrop for the desperate stand they were about to make. The aggressive prospectors, now a formidable, disorganized force, emboldened by their growing numbers and perhaps by the raw courage of liquor, launched a coordinated, sprawling search of the valley. Kael, Lilian, and the small, diverse group of allies Kael had managed to gather, a few weathered elderly native hunters whose wisdom ran as deep as the ancient rivers, a reclusive trapper whose eyes held the secrets of countless winters, and even a disillusioned prospector, scarred by his own experiences with greed, positioned themselves strategically. Their plan was not to engage in open, bloody combat, a battle they were ill-equipped to win by force alone. Instead, it was to outwit, to deter, to make this remote valley too costly, too terrifying for the prospectors to claim. The ensuing hours were a tense, exhausting dance of evasion and strategic disruption. Kael, with his unparalleled, almost supernatural knowledge of the terrain, led the efforts, a silent phantom in the swirling snow. He set cunning ambushes, created bewildering diversions, and harassed the prospectors with perfectly placed shots that never aimed to kill, but to intimidate, to sow fear and confusion. Lilian, armed with a newfound fierce courage that surprised even herself, played a vital role, her quick thinking and ability to adapt proving invaluable. She distracted one frustrated group with a well-timed alarm, a series of rocks tumbling down a slope, while Kael circled, unseen around them, leading them further astray. The extreme weather, a force that had once been their greatest enemy, became their most potent ally, disorienting the invaders, turning their bluster into shivering desperation. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of gold and rose, a breathtaking beauty emerging from the storm's fury, the prospectors, exhausted, frustrated, and increasingly superstitious about the ghosts in the valley, began their ragged retreat. Their leader, a formidable brute who had reveled in intimidation, finally succumbed to Kael's cunning, trapped in a ravine, his ego shattered, his will to continue broken. The valley was safe, for now. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, silent shadows across the pristine snow, Lilian stood beside Kael, Leah cradled securely in her arms. The fighting was over, the immediate threat averted, but the future, as vast and unpredictable as the Alaskan wilderness itself, remained uncertain. Yet looking at Kael, whose stoic face now held a hint of weary relief, a quiet peace, Lilian felt a profound, undeniable sense of hope. They had faced the raw, untamed power of Alaska, the destructive greed of men, and against all odds they had emerged stronger, forever changed. This land, once a symbol of her profound loss, of a life tragically cut short, was now a testament to her fierce resilience and the unexpected bonds forged in the crucible of adversity. They were no longer truly alone. A small, unlikely community, bound not by blood, but by a shared struggle and a deep mutual respect for the land, had formed. The journey was far from over. the challenges of the Alaskan frontier ever present, but with Kael by her side, a silent, unwavering protector, and Leah's innocent warmth a constant, tangible reminder of life's preciousness, Lilian knew they could face whatever the Alaskan wilderness threw at them next. Their future, like the vast, untouched expanse of the Alaskan landscape, was unwritten, but it was filled with the quiet, enduring promise of a new beginning. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this.